This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, fantasy book fans? This is Steven, your host with Fantology Podcast. I have my lifelong friend Ben along with me today, and this is an exciting episode for us because we have a special guest, author James Islington, all the way from Australia, here to talk about his new series, The Hierarchy. The first book, called The Will of the Many, comes out next week, and Ben and I have both read it and really thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't want to put you on the spot here too much, James, but I do believe this was my favorite book that I've read so far this year, so I'm really excited to chat with you about it. We're not going to do any spoilers, so if you're listening and you obviously haven't read it, don't worry, we're not doing any plot things, but we do want to kind of get into like inception of the series and just kind of James's career as an author and wherever else this chat takes us. So yeah, thanks again, James, for coming on with us.
Nice. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'll go ahead and get us started then. So just kind of as an intro, tell people that are watching, listening, a little bit about your career, where you're coming from. Your previous trilogy, like Cadian's trilogy, was pretty well received, pretty popular around. So I think you're like a fairly well-known name. But for those that haven't read your stuff yet, what can they expect from you if they pick up an Islington book?
Sure. Let's see. So I guess going back into how I started as an author. I started writing 12 years ago now, and I was very much inspired by what I read as a teenager, which is stuff like Wheel of Time and Magician and things like that. But then I in my 20s, I really didn't read a lot of fantasy, I guess. I didn't go off the genre at all. I always wanted to write, but it wasn't until I picked up Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson that I really went, this is great. Just what he did with I guess his pacing and plot twists and the way that series really came together was really just inspiring. And I went, cool, this is, I'm ready to write now, sort of thing. And so I guess with Lacanius, I went into it going, well, particularly Wheel of Time was a really big influence when I was growing up. And so I kind of went, I want to write something with that sort of feel to it, but with more of a pacing of Mistborn and with those sort of plot twists and stuff like that. I still love Wheel of Time, but man, does some of those books drag.
The slog.
The slog, exactly. Like I actually tried rereading it. It was a few years ago now, but it was well into when I was writing Lacanius, and I went, I've obviously talked a lot about Wheel of Time, and I know the tagline for the series, which Orbit put on it, was basically, if you love Wheel of Time, this is for you, sort of thing. I was like, man, I really should reread Wheel of Time because it's been 20 years. I started reading it, and I got to about book 2, and I went, nah, I'm good. And again, it's not that it's some of it's great, and obviously it has depth, and there's some amazing foreshadowing in it, and it's a really cool world. But by modern standards now, the pacing, it's very description heavy. There's a lot of really slow parts. It goes off into very, very random side characters at points. And some people love that, but I kind of went, look, I'm better off reading newer stuff and exposing myself to new ideas.
Right. Yeah. It's cool to hear that you're so inspired by Mistborn. I and when I was in my mid-20s, I kind of fallen away from reading fantasy a ton, but I read all of Sanderson's stuff, and I was kind of just like waiting for the next Sanderson books to come out. And so the Lacanius trilogy is really the thing that was like, oh, there's other authors out there that like. So anyway,
Nice.
it's a huge compliment to you because
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, because and then from there I kind of branched off to a lot of other different fantasies. So it was it's cool to hear you say that because it I mean your books inspired me to keep on reading other stuff too. So
Fantastic.
and I will also plug the Lycanius trilogy is one of the only fantasy books that my wife has read with me. So it's like the one trilogy I can always be like, hey, we're you know, it's kind of like that. So that's
Awesome.
yeah.
So you mentioned it's been 3.5 years since the Lycanius trilogy concluded, and now you have a new series coming out, The Hierarchy,
Yep.
starting with The Will of the Many, coming out next week. So tell us a little bit about the inception of that series, what readers can expect, what was the process of going from series 1 is complete and it was successful, and now series 2, like that seems like a pretty big jump as an author.
Yeah, it was it's funny because I guess the inception of it was I got to it was 2019, and I finished off book 3 of Lycanius, and it was kind of March or April, and my agent sent me an email going, publishers are asking what's next, sort of thing, and there was definitely a vibe that they would have really liked me to keep on going with Lycanius and write more in that world, which I understand from a financial point of view. It's a sure bet essentially, and look, and I loved writing in that world. I am very proud of those books, and will 100% do more stories in that world in the future. Like I've already got one story that I mentioned at the end of Light of All That Falls, that it's essentially content that I sort of cut from that I will go back to, and that's actually on my list of things to do relatively soon. But yeah, 2019, I'd been working in that world for 8 years.
Yeah.
And it was just, I just kind of went, nah, this is the point where I can become an author that does one world for the rest of my career, and that's okay. Like some people do that and they do it well, and they clearly enjoy it. But I just felt like it was time for something new, and so that was kind of, I wouldn't call it the inspiration for Hierarchy, but it was certainly the starting point for where I started to look for inspiration, because I went, I don't want to keep on going with Lycanius right now. I want to do something new, but if I'm going to do something new, I don't want to do Lycanius 2.0. I want to make sure that this is a different series. It's a blank slate, so I can stretch myself a bit as a writer. I can try a new perspective. I can try, just coming at things from a different angle, I guess. And so that was really where I started, looking for inspiration, was just, what are the points of differentiation? So for example, this is written first person. And that's something that some of my favorite series are written first person, and that was something I was keen to try. It's a different challenge, especially with epic fantasy, because epic fantasy, obviously, to be epic, you need this massive scope. Like that's kind of the definition of it. Right. And then first person, you're following one character, and to convey massive scope of a story from one character's perspective can be really tricky. And it's also it's a lot more personal, I think, when you go first person. You're in that character's head a lot more. It's a lot more zoomed in. So yeah, that was an interesting challenge for this series. I decided I was going to try and base it off a historical culture this time, rather than just kind of make it up off the top of my head, essentially. again, just as it sort of started as a very neat way of going, this will feel distinct. This will feel, grounded in something that we're all relatively familiar with. But then I chose, it was really ended up being a fairly obvious choice for me, was ancient Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great, because it's, I'm actually surprised it's not used more often in epic fantasy, because it's such a great setting for it. It's,
yeah, after
obviously,
after reading the book, I was thinking like there's got to be a lot of like kind of Romanesque stories, but the best comparisons I could come up with were Red Rising, like kind of, and Jim Butcher's Codex Alera series. But after that, I didn't have a lot. So yeah, but like you say, it's
exactly
like
the same,
such an obvious choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so I admittedly my when I started my Roman history was a little bit shaky. I'd watched Gladiator a couple of times. But I went and really delved into the history, and that was a great source of just inspiration, even just for little world building things.
Mm-hmm.
So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed taking that historical kind of culture and applying it to fantasy. And then you mentioned Red Rising just then. It's a series that I've only read the first trilogy, but I absolutely love that trilogy. And that was one of the inspirations for this series as well, in that kind of the pace and the tone and the really proactive protagonist in particular. It's funny because a lot of there's some other similar things, like Romanesque setting, and even thematically, they did like they're at a very high level. You could say that there are similarities. And it was funny because I wrote the blurb for The Will of the Many. It wasn't really that long ago. It was, we'd done editing. It was all set. And I wrote the blurb and I went, great, this is a fine blurb. It explains, it conveys the story and all that sort of stuff. Also, it sounds a lot like Red Rising. I haven't just copied Red Rising, have I? I had this moment of panic going, this sounds too similar. But after about 5 minutes, I kind of reassured myself, no, it's fine. They are different. They're certainly they're cut from the same cloth, obviously. But I feel quite confident that the books are very different, and certainly where the series are going as well is very different. So
yeah, I can say if you're a fan of Red Rising, you'll probably be a fan of this book, but especially by the end they're just like completely different. So I think that this, like, I think it's probably because of the first person point of view, but this is like the book that I stayed up late reading. Like I haven't stayed up until like 3 a.m. reading a fantasy book in like probably 10 years, but this book multiple times I was just like, I can't put it down. I just have to read the next chapter. So I think one of the things that you're really wonderful at is like, there's just this world that feels like we just got plopped down into, you know what I mean? There's so much depth, and it just feels like people are living this world apart from like the main character, and that and so I think again, the first person point of view kind of lends itself to that, but
definitely.
It's just really like, there's just so much depth, and so I really appreciate that that about this book.
Excellent. Fantastic.
One of the things that I enjoy is that you have a lot of tropes that are commonly used in The Will of the Many. Like we have our magic school, right? Which is something that everyone always loves. And you have the main character protagonist who is very capable. Right. And it kind of goes through a lot of similar beats that you've seen in other books. But at no point did I think like, oh, this is so overdone. I've already seen this. This is boring, right? Like it seemed like a fresh take on a lot of these things. So how did you do that? Like when as you were writing the book, what was your thought process in going through and saying, I want to have all of these kind of similar things, but I also want it to feel fresh. Like what was the what was the workflow in doing that?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting with tropes. I mean, obviously, as soon as when I pitched it initially, and it had a magic academy, it was that's obviously a very well-worn trope, and it can be done. It can be done poorly. It's always about execution, I think. But it's funny. I think over the years I've become in a lot of ways I've become a lot more analytical with my writing. Like I can look at what I'm doing and go, okay, no, I'm using this scene to do this, and looking at it in a very mechanical sort of way. But when it comes to tropes, I still find that that's very much the artistic part of it for me, where I just use what I want for the story, and I just get a sense of, as I'm doing it, sometimes you're using a trope and you go, well, I'm going to play this straight because it's sort of comforting to the reader, and then sometimes I'm going to completely subvert it to surprise them. But I never really approach it in a mechanical way. I never sit down and go, okay, there's this trope. How am I going to make it different or make it fresh? It's purely I'm going through. I know where I'm going with the story. I know the themes that I want to explore, and I'll get to a certain point, and I'll be like, okay, is it time for a surprise? Is it time for a quieter period where you get a sense of satisfaction in seeing a trope played out? And so yeah, it's an interesting question, because of all the things that I think I now approach a lot more mechanically, I think tropes is still something that I very much just play it by ear.
I mean, it seems like you have a very intuitive sense of that, like of what to do there, because even though there is a very capable main character, it feels like he's getting like just kind of pushed around a lot in the book. You know what I mean? And so I think that's one of the things that helps make it feel fresh, is because like, yeah, one-on-one fight, this guy's gonna like kick some butt. But like when it comes to like the overall like politicking and stuff, he's got some work ahead of him. So and just like the pacing, like there's one part where both Steven and I were like, man, we're so glad that like it was, I don't want to give any spoilers, but it was just probably the most heartfelt part of the book. It was probably 2/3 of the way through, and he's having a conversation, and both of us were like, man, it just felt like he like just the sense of home that like really connected with both of us. And and that's like a part that I think, like an aspect that I think is missing from a lot of books, and it was very refreshing to find in this one. So it was just I don't know, like I think you have a lot of intuition when it comes to those kind of tropes and how it connects with the readers, because it's certain, like especially that scene certainly connected with both of us. I mean, we talked about it quite extensively together. So
fantastic. Yeah, I know the scene you're talking about, and yeah, I was yeah. It's sometimes you write books and you finish a scene and you go, yeah, I'm pleased with that.
Yeah.
And that was definitely one of them. Yeah.
That's awesome.
You mentioned themes. How do you approach themes in your series? Because it seems like you really tie them in pretty closely into the plot. Like Licinius, this exploration of free will was very much a part of what was going on throughout, like a major part. It wasn't just like, here's the story and here's this theme that's kind of connected. It like was the story. And it seems like we have something similar going on here. One of the major themes is like imperialism and how do we interact with this empire, Romanesque empire, right? And are they good? Are they bad? And how does that all tie in together into what's going on in the story? So how do you do that? Because I mean, it really seems like it's woven together quite nicely.
Yeah. I think it's largely that I try and start with the magic system being important to theme in some way. So in Lacanius, obviously, the augurs being able to see an inevitable future that immediately brings up questions of free will, and similarly, I guess with hierarchy, the way that that will is with that structure of society, and sort of the systems of power at play and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of it's integral to the world, and so in a lot of ways I can't avoid it. I can't avoid exploring those themes, and so it's not sort of a tacked on story element. It's baked into the world, and so I would have to actively write around it to not be exploring it. And that's, I mean, you know, this is only my second series, but I think that's definitely something that I want to do. I think that's it's a great way of using fantasy is to have a magic system that is interesting in some like morally complex way, I guess, or philosophically complex way. And so yeah, I think that's kind of why my books tend to be so focused on theme, and it just interests me generally.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool. I think like a lot of times creativeness happens when we kind of like confine ourselves a little bit. And so it seems like that's kind of, you know, you're kind of like confining yourself and letting the creativity flourish from that. So that's really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I, like you said, the unique magic system of, and it's not too many spoilers to say that like this magic system kind of comes off the back of the many, so to speak. And I mean, that's such a unique concept. And it's something that I don't think we've seen done before in this age of hard magic system, of having this like second class of citizens that's supporting it. And it's one of those ideas, like kind of like with the Roman Empire, where like, that seems so obvious, you know, like once you see it, you're like, how is this not written into more books? So it was really cool to see that done so well here. And like the moral like hazards that presents to society. So it was cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know Sanderson talks about I've listened to his lecture series, and one of the things he talks about is a magic system that then like ties into all aspects of society, because if you have magic in the world, it doesn't make sense that it's not like, you know, actively forming all of the world around it. And yeah, like Ben said, the way that the magic in the hierarchy works very much influences just the structure of the entire world. And yeah, I think that's really well done, and it really just kind of makes it work, because then our main character, who doesn't really like what's going on quite as much, is trying to resist, but he can't completely, because it's just like
So ingrained. Yeah. It would be like being very like anti-capitalist and trying not to spend any money. You know, it's like, well, what do you do? You know? So yeah,
exactly cool. Right. And yeah, and I think that was definitely another thing that I enjoyed writing about the book, was that coming from the perspective of a character who you know, trying to essentially avoid the inevitable social pressures of that society was just it was just really interesting to write.
So we have a few questions from fans on Discord, and one of them here, I'll read it off. He says, I really liked the take that mages were despised rather than revered in this series. He's talking about Lacanius. Does he plan on turning other tropes on their heads in the upcoming series? And I mean, I think the answer is probably yes, but I'll let you kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I was saying before with tropes. I mean, yes would be the answer. I certainly don't play all the tropes completely straight. That I think there's some that follow an expected path, and some that probably go in completely different directions. Which I think is what makes a good book, because you can't subvert all of them. Otherwise, I mean, there's a reason that
Right.
the
Yeah.
tropes are there, because they are usually really enjoyable storytelling devices.
Mhm.
So you got to have some mix of the familiar and the surprising, I think. But yeah, definitely, and like I said before, with tropes, I don't look at them mechanically and go, I'm definitely subverting this because I'm going out of my way to subvert this or anything like that. It's very much an instinctive thing. But yeah, for sure, there will be more of that.
So between the two series, Licanius and Hierarchy, what would you say were some some similarities in the way that you wrote them? What was
Mm,
easy for you because you're like, oh, I've already kind of figured out how I want to deal with this specific problem in my previous
mm.
series, and what was different? I mean, I know the POV thing, that sounds like it was a pretty different challenge going from third to first person. Was there anything else that kind of surprised you as you were writing? Like, this is unexpectedly difficult or different?
I was a little bit surprised at how difficult it was to get into a new world.
Mm.
I shouldn't have been, but I underestimated the task, or overestimated my ability, or something at some point. Because and like I said, 2019, I was like, right, I'm ready for something new. And then a couple of months into that process, I went, have I made a mistake? Because you spend so long in one world, and like as a writer, you're thinking about this stuff constantly. And Lacanius was such a complex series as well,
Oh yeah.
because with time travel especially, you constantly go, okay, have I made sure everything's consistent? Have I, how
Yeah.
are all these pieces going to fit together? And so yeah, my head had just been in this one world for so long, and then trying to break that mold, and go in a completely new direction and figure out new themes and what I was interested in exploring even. And yeah, I was obviously fine in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that was really that was an interesting experience, going through that for the first time again. Um, what else? Um, I think I was just a lot more, other than that. I think I was a lot more equipped coming to it this time. Lacanius was my first series, and there's things you're very much just feeling your way while you're writing it. As much advice as there is online, and you can do all the research in the world, but at the end of the day, it's you're only really learning through writing. And it was funny because looking back, I think particularly for the second book, like I had Lacanius planned out, in broad strokes. Like I knew exactly where I wanted it to end. But I wrote the first book, and that's, writing your first book, that's such a big effort. It's such a big accomplishment just to get that finished, let alone out into readers' hands and stuff. But I went through this process of I finished it. I had my friends and family beta read, and they really liked it. But that was kind of all the feedback that I had. And then I went to agents for about a year and got rejected all the way along the line. And then eventually went self-published. And when I went self-published, it wasn't that it wasn't throwing in the towel by any stretch of the imagination. Like, self-publishing was just reaching that point of respectability. I think when I did it, there was a few big hits, but it was still a little bit like, you know, I'd say, oh, I'm an author, and people would say, oh, yeah, who are you published by? I go, oh, I'm self-published. And they go, oh, okay. But when I self-published, so it was 2014. So I started 2011. So I self-published 2014. And by the time I self-published, I really hadn't done a lot of work on the second book. And I wasn't expecting much at all from that experience. And then when it suddenly started selling, I had to go, oh, okay, I've got to write a second book now. I've got to, and I kind of went into almost just this panic mode of writing, where I was like, okay, no, I've got to make this good, and I've got to make sure this all fits, and so that that experience of really writing the whole trilogy, but especially the second book, was kind of, it wasn't rushed, but there was just a lot of figuring it out as I went, and kind of doing it under a lot of internal pressure. Because again, you're writing a second book after a successful first book, and you're going, oh man, this is my dream. Essentially, I want to do this as a career. If I put out a rubbish second book, that could be it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this experience now is just a lot more, I feel so much more confident writing this book, a lot more relaxed, a lot more certain of how I should do things. There were mistakes I think I made in some approaches that I did to Licanius. I don't think that they ended up as issues necessarily within the books themselves, but just in the writing process, where you know, I would do certain things with drafts and then go, oh, no, I've wasted 2 months doing this. And so you learn a lot about yourself, about what works best for you during that process. So yeah, I think writing this book was, on the whole, aside from that initial period of panic where I was a little bit worried about just starting the new world, I think it's been very smooth overall.
It's cool to hear you talk about like this self-publishing thing, because I'll say, I mean, this is remembering back like 10 years ago now at this point or whatever,
Yep.
but from like the fantasy book community, I think it thrived because it was self-published, if that makes sense. Like, people felt like
Yep.
they were like finding this like diamond in the rough, you know what I mean? Like, holy cow, what's this book? It's like has so many layers and it's self-published, man. Like, can you believe it? And so whereas like obviously like it's a dream to be published by like a massive publisher too, but like you wouldn't have had that same like sense of finding something unexpected, you know?
Absolutely. And look, it was an amazing experience, just because I didn't know marketing or anything like that. And it's really made me appreciate like how important just word of mouth is to authors, because I think sometimes you see a really successful traditionally published book and you kind of go, oh, is this just a big marketing push? I don't know. And whereas I think pretty much across the board, everything that's come out of self-publishing, and there are some amazing stories come out of self-publishing. I mean, even a book I read recently, The Lost War, by Justin Lee Anderson, I think publishes today by Orbit, but that was originally self-published. And I read that recently and really enjoyed it. but anything that's coming out of self-published kind of has to be noteworthy kind of by default, because word of mouth is how it's getting noticed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great, it was a very unusual path to publication, to traditional publication, but I wouldn't change it for the world, for sure.
So does it seem like we have another question here? And I know you kind of said that you had Licanius planned out. I know that there's kind of like two things that people talk about a lot about as authors, like either you're like an outliner or you're like a, like discovery writer, right? And so it seems like just from reading your books, you have like the plot beats, and it's very clear like you've thought about this, right? But like where on the scale would you put yourself on that?
It's funny because I'm probably less on the outlining scale than you would think. I definitely always know where I'm heading. And so I definitely have an outline, and for the series as well, I think that's important for fantasy series. I think it'd be easy to go, okay, I know where I'm going for this book and I'll figure out the rest later. But to really bring everything together as a conclusion to a series, you really want to know where you're heading. And so I tend to figure out, where do I want to end? How do I want everything to come together? Where do I want the characters to finish up in terms of character arcs? And then sometimes I'll also have major scenes that I have in my head where I'm like, yeah, no, this is a scene that's going to be cool and crucial, and I'm definitely going to have this in book 3 or whatever. But everything else along the way, I do tend to I tend to fill in the blanks a lot. So yeah, I have a skeleton, but I tend to fill in the blanks a lot as I write. And I think some of my best ideas do come while I'm writing, which unfortunately means that I have to do a bunch of drafts. Sucks because blows me down. I wish I was a one draft guy, because that would be amazing. I am just both in awe and incredibly jealous of Brandon Sanderson and the way he
it's like puts the percentages up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Like, yeah, he's such a great example of somebody who he writes quickly, but he writes quality. And he's just a great ambassador for the fantasy genre generally. But I unfortunately am not that fast. But that's okay. That's my process. It takes me a little bit longer to write, but I plug away every day. And I think the good thing is that I'm not necessarily fast, but I feel like I'm confident enough now that I'm a fairly consistent writer. Like I'm going to be bringing out a book every 1.5 to 2 years, roughly. And I mean, even this book, what are we now? 2000. Yeah. So like I said earlier, it's 3.5 years since Light of All That Falls was published. But realistically, I actually had this finished mid 2021. And what just ended up happening is that there was a really big delay in editing. So I submitted it, I think, July 2021, and we didn't get to editing till late May 2022.
Really?
Yeah,
it
was
a COVID thing.
Yeah. Look, it was just publishing backed up a lot. My editor also just had some he was sick a couple of times, and then he had some personal stuff, and stuff comes up. It was not anybody's fault. It wasn't an issue even. It certainly it threw me a little bit. Like I did because you're waiting on your edits for book one, and you start. I did
Starting
start
book
on book
two,
two,
yeah.
but you're kind of going, am I writing stuff that I'm just going to have to scrap because
Yeah.
if things change in book one. So there was that delay there. But yeah, so even this first book, even though it was 3.5 years since I last published something, that was still only a couple of years of actual writing to get to near completion. And then there's another couple of months on top of that for editing when we did get around to it. But yeah.
Well, hearing you say that you are consistent is good, because you are masterful at like this cliffhanger at the end of books of like just turning everything on its head and like making you really want to like see what happens next. So
yeah,
I see that grin, like like so it's good to,
I'm excited. I'm excited to write. I've really been enjoying writing this new one based on the ending of obviously I can't say too much, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing people's reactions to the ending of this one.
Yeah. So Lycanius has this same type of feel where you're going along and it's a fantasy story, then all of a sudden really everything changes, and you mentioned there's a big time travel element to that series. And I mean, we're not going to talk too much into what's going on here in the hierarchy, but same type of thing. Like there is stuff hinted at, and then by the end you're like, oh man, there's a whole nother layer to this thing. Like, is that like the Islington brand? Like you like to have that in your stories and just pull stuff out at readers?
I think so. I think I really enjoy. I think it's kind of almost just part of how I plan out books. In that, I mean, obviously, like I said, I know where everything's heading, and so I know all the information. And it's more about timing the reveal of key information, I guess, at the end. That like I don't want to leave people like I feel like with this book I was really pleased because I feel like this book is to an extent quite a nice self-enclosed arc for the most part. And the ending isn't it isn't a cliffhanger in the sense of literally, somebody's literally hanging from a cliff and you don't know whether they're going to fall, sort of thing. It's more of a tease for what's to come.
It's very much like the first book of Mistborn, where it's like, okay, they got the Lord Ruler, like what happens next though? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I think I certainly enjoy writing books. I guess like that. Yeah, I guess we'll see as we continue.
Yeah.
Well, if you need some beta readers, look, we're all. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm definitely very anxious to see what happens in book 2.
It's tough when you do like have these early releases, because you do just want to talk to like everybody about it, and you're like, I only know one other person that's read it, and so we're like trying to theorize, and we're like, there's no Reddit post that you can go to and see these theories yet, so
Yep. And then I imagine you have to wait. I mean, you guys at least have it's just before release. My wife read this story in 2021, and I don't show anybody.
You don't show her
work in progress or anything like that, and I don't really tell her what's story stuff, because I like to, because she's great. She's a great beta reader, and so I don't want to give her a heads up on what's happening, because I actually want to get her reaction. But so she's been living with that for 2 years already.
Man, that's funny. I don't envy her.
Okay, I want to ask about world building, and I want to ask about characters. So let's start with world building, because you kind of touched on it already. Obviously, we have a brand new series and world that has been created, and it sounds like you said you kind of sat down and plugged away at it for a couple months before thinking, have I made a huge mistake? So what's your process of creating something and getting all these different pieces together into a world that can support a strong story?
Yeah. I think, like I said earlier, it sort of starts a little bit with the magic system, and deciding on a theme. But yeah, the process is just a really messy one. It's not, I guess because I've really only done it twice. And the first time, I mean, you know, I started writing Lycanius when I was 30, but I'd had ideas for it for years and years, like, you know, since I was a teenager. Nothing well developed, but just some of the basic concepts were already there. And so I felt like Lycanius came together very, very easily. World building for this story was very much, you know, I settled on the magic system, the theme. I settled on Rome as a base. Then I took a lot of world building inspiration from historical Rome. So I listened to, you know, 50 hours worth of audiobooks and you know, did my research and all that sort of stuff. And you know, you sort of pick up bits here and there, and kind of use the bits that you go, ah, this fits in really nicely with the theme. This is perfect. I'm going to use this. And then, you know, just occasionally you go, oh, well, this is just a nice world building thing that gives it a bit of flavor, and it's not necessarily key, but it'll make the world feel more real, feel a bit more lived in, and so on. But yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of a messy process of just throwing ideas at the wall, I think, and seeing what sticks. And then eventually, yeah, you get a really nice core idea, and that usually leads to a story. And I tend to think that story should be tied to your world building as well, as much as possible, especially with epic fantasy. I feel like it's important to have, you know, if you're going to have this big, you know, epic scope, then the history of your world and what's the basis of your world should have some relevance to what's happening in the story. Otherwise, they're a bit too disconnected. The history can just kind of be a bit dry and boring, and you know, it's a bit of he's made up a world and then just layered a story on top, sort of thing. So it's all very interconnected, which again is why it was so difficult. I think it's kind of going around in circles and trying to figure out what works for a while. And then eventually, yeah, I settled on a few of the core things, and everything really grew from there. So
yeah, I like how you said that, like for example, one of the core things to the world is like the hierarchy, right? And then you have this like little subplot of like this main character that's progressing throughout that hierarchy, like in the form of like an even more narrow concept of the school, right? So I like how that, like, you can kind of expand that and contract it as you see fit to make like a cool story. Yeah.
Okay, so characters now. So tell us a little bit about the challenge of writing this like really deep story in a first person point of view, where we really need to be able to get inside our main character's head, compared to a third person narrative where you want it to have several characters and each one kind of expands the world in different ways. I would imagine one of the challenges with a first person story is making side characters notable, because you don't get as much time with them as you do in a third person story. Was that something that was difficult, or what else for you works with characters?
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting with this series. I think think with characters, it was one of the things I really tried to focus on a little bit more in this series. As I was saying earlier, one of the reasons I wanted to start a new series was to start with a blank slate and kind of stretch myself a bit as an author. And when I did that, I did go back through the reviews, both positive and negative, of Lacanius, and try to take some common themes of, okay, where can I improve? And it's it's not easy sometimes, but I think one of the things that is it's not a common criticism of Lacanius, but it's common enough that I noticed it as a thread, was that some of the characters felt a little bit flat, a little bit samey, and it's one of those things where you go, well, obviously I disagree with it. I didn't write the characters like that. I feel like as a reader, these characters would be, I would really enjoy these characters, but as a professional, that's where you have to go. I can, we work in a subjective field, and as much as I disagree with that, that does not make that an invalid criticism. And so it was one of the things I really wanted to do with this series is sit down, and go, yeah, I want to make sure that my characters feel a bit more distinct. I want to pay them more attention, develop them a bit more, and not to the extent that I'm going to sacrifice the things that I think that I'm good at or I enjoy, like plot and pacing and stuff like that, but just make more of an effort to really work in character work into the story. And yeah, so it was definitely a challenge. I think in some ways for the first person perspective, I found that almost easier, because you are in Vis's head so much more, and so it's his emotions are, I guess, more obvious, and you're that much closer to the story that you're more likely to feel for that character, and so I feel like that was easier. And then side characters, it was really just a case of going, okay, they're not just here to drive the plot forward, they're here to be characters in their own right. There's the old saying that every character is a hero in their own story.
Right.
And so you try and keep that in mind. And hopefully that's something that comes across in this book, that it's something that has improved.
I definitely think it has, and I think that it's cool because Viz, like me and Steven were talking before and saying that would be hard to do this characterization the way that you did it, but like you also do perceive characters how Viz perceives them too, you know what I mean? Like, so he kind of categorizes them for you, and he like notices distinct things about them too. So it's, that's, I really enjoyed each of the characters in this book, and they are so different because they all, like, one of the things I really loved is each character had their own motivations, right? That were like totally separate from Viz's, and that were like driving their own, like they had their own motives. So I think that really came across in the book for me.
Awesome. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
I think it's cool too with the first person narrative. You can kind of obfuscate what's going on a bit by, we have this one guy's point of view on who the surrounding people are and what their motives might be or might not be.
Absolutely.
But we don't, as the reader, we don't really know what's going on until this character does.
And I think that's where the present tense helps as well. Because you do certain things in the past tense, and if he's narrating in the past tense, he should know. But present tense, it really it means, especially for this, it means you as the reader, you don't know who he can trust, especially with his particular situation. So yeah, I think that I agree. I think that really helps from that perspective.
Okay, we have a question here that you've kind of touched on a little bit, but it's from another friend who is also an author. She's publishing her second book later this year. And she says, as an author, can you ask about how he approached getting a new trilogy book deal once he'd finished with Lycanius? And it sounds like part of it is your agent came to you and said, what's next? But from an author point of view, is there anything that you would add to that process?
Yeah, I mean, that was honestly, that was just a very pleasant surprise when it happened. I assumed the entire way through that I was going to have to just start another book, finish another book, submit it to my agent submit it to publish it, basically go through the same process. Yeah, what ended up happening was Paul came to me and said, yep, look, we've got interest from publishers about what you want to do next. Can you put together a couple of sort of one-page pitches, and we'll shop them around and see what happens, sort of thing. And it all kind of went from there. So that was nice to get a contract without actually having to write a book. But look, I think that honestly, I assumed that was just an effect of the fact that the first trilogy sold well. I have to assume that was a business decision where they went, cool, we're confident that whatever you write next has a good chance of selling. So, you know, let us know what you want to write and we'll see whether we're interested, sort of thing.
It sounds like you have to stick up for yourself a little bit with not wanting to continue on in the Lycanius world too. You know what I mean? Like you had to, you know.
Oh, for sure. I definitely got some none too subtle questions about whether I was going to keep on going. And look, that's fine. I understand. I understand that you know, it's especially, you know, publishing is a business and they want to do what's going to be the surest money. Yeah, you're right. I did have to put my foot down a little bit and go, no, this is what I want to do. But my agent especially was fantastic. He supported me the 100% of the way. He was never going, oh, you should write more Lycanius. It was very much the publisher that was pretty keen for that. But yeah, it was an interesting experience, that's for sure.
Awesome.
Okay, so final question. Book comes out next week. This is your fourth book, first in a new trilogy. How have feelings around book releases changed for you over the years? Like what's the level of anxiety? What are the feelings as this comes out next week? Are you just excited? Are you nervous? Are you dying? Like what's going on?
Do you have any traditions that if I don't wear these clothes on book release day, then it's not going to sell?
I should have those. No, I don't have any traditions. It's been very different for each one. This one is a weird one in that I am the most confident in this book out of all of my books. I feel like I feel confident in saying that this is my best book as an author. But that makes me the most nervous because again, it's such a subjective thing for readers. Like I can go, this is my best book. I know that I have done my best work here. It could still not be as well received as Lycanius. People could theoretically read this and go, well, this, you know, it doesn't resonate as much for me. You know, I'm not connecting as much with it as as with your previous work, like that's a possibility. I don't think it'll happen. The early reviews for this book have been great, which has been really encouraging. But you know, it's still that until it's out in the world, you just don't know. You don't know how people are going to react. And it's very different from, you know, I think about my first book, and I was just excited to have it out in the world when I self-published. I was very relaxed about that because I had no expectations whatsoever. I was like, oh great, I've got 2 sales. This is amazing. Second book, I was like out of my mind stressed because again, I had that fear of you know, if this is not a good book, if this is not received well, this could be it. This could be my career done. The dream gone sort of thing, which, you know, was probably over exaggerating the situation, but that's how I felt at the time. And then when Light came out, I don't, honestly, I don't remember. I think I was just generally pretty confident. I was very happy with the way it all finished. I was really excited to see what people felt about the ending. It's a little bit of nervousness because, you know, that was the end of the story, and you know, you really want people to enjoy the end of the story. Like that's what you're leaving them with, essentially.
Yeah.
So I was nervous about that, but again, they've all been very different. But yeah, for this one, confident and nervous at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, to some degree, you're trying to read people's minds and make sure that you're writing whatever
Yeah.
is going to resonate with them. And who knows, maybe
Absolutely.
like everyone in the world changed in the past 5 years. I don't think they did either, but
Yeah.
you never know.
You never know. You never know. But you know, we'll see in a week's time.
Well, it's an exciting time. So, you know, we'll be out there promoting it on Twitter and in our little circle of friends too. So, because I'm excited for people
Awesome.
to read it, just so I can talk to people about it. So,
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Yes, selfishly, we want people to read it. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, James. This has been really fun. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. That's been yeah, it's been good fun. I've enjoyed it.
All right. Best of luck with everything on release, and you know, let us know about that beta reader.
The beta reading
offer.
Yep.
That's a serious. That's we're not messing
sure,
around here.
For sure.
We need to know what happens.
I'll let my wife read it first.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you want to check out The Will of the Many, it is available everywhere on May 23rd. That is release day, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching and listening. See you later.
Yeah.